November 12, 2018, the body of Daniel Blackwood, 52, was discovered in his suite at the Writer's Retreat, a converted Victorian estate on the outskirts of Oxford that hosted one of England's most prestigious literary conferences. The celebrated literary agent was found slumped at the antique writing desk, an empty teacup beside his lifeless hand, an expression of shock frozen on his face. Initial reports suggested natural causes, perhaps a heart attack, but the autopsy would reveal a sophisticated poisoning that pointed to premeditation and intimate knowledge of the victim's habits. As investigators delved deeper, suspicion quickly fell upon his wife, Elizabeth Blackwood, 48, whose first major novel, The Accomplice, had recently taken the literary world by storm after years of modest publications and critical indifference. What emerged over the following days was a chilling tale of psychological manipulation, thwarted ambition, and meticulously planned revenge. Elizabeth, long overshadowed by her husband's success, had not only discovered Daniel's systematic sabotage of her writing career, but also unearthed a buried criminal history from his university days. A history she had transformed into the thinly disguised plot of her breakthrough novel. What the literary community had praised as exceptional fiction turned out to be a calculated exposure of deadly truth, with Daniel's murder serving as Elizabeth's ultimate revision to their shared narrative. The morning mist clung to the grounds of the Writer's Retreat when Sarah Pembroke, the conference coordinator, used her master key to check on Daniel Blackwood after he failed to appear for his highly anticipated panel on navigating the new publishing landscape. The converted manor house with its oak-paneled walls and leaded glass windows had welcomed literary luminaries for decades, its creaking corridors having hosted Auden, Graves, and Murdoch in years past. Now it played host to a more gruesome distinction as the site of a meticulously orchestrated murder. The scent of old books and beeswax polish that typically perfumed the air mingled with something sharper, more medicinal, a detail that would later take on grim significance. "Mr. Blackwood?" Sarah had called, knocking once more before pushing open the heavy door to Suite 12, known informally as the Hemingway Room for its masculine decor and impressive collection of first editions. The suite appeared undisturbed, papers neatly arranged on the writing desk, leather-bound notebook open to a half-filled page of Daniel's distinctive handwriting, his reading glasses folded precisely beside a dog-eared manuscript. Only Daniel himself seemed out of place, his body unnaturally still, head tilted slightly as if he had been interrupted mid-thought by the arrival of death. Sarah's scream echoed through the retreat's hushed corridors, bringing several conference attendees rushing to the scene, among them Elizabeth Blackwood. Witnesses would later describe her reaction as controlled, her face paling visibly, but her voice remaining steady as she assessed the situation with an almost clinical detachment. "Has anyone called for medical help?" she asked, moving toward her husband's body with deliberate steps. When another writer moved to check for a pulse, Elizabeth gently intervened. "He's clearly gone," she said softly. "We shouldn't disturb anything until authorities arrive." This seemingly thoughtful consideration for police procedure would later take on a more sinister interpretation. Detective Chief Inspector Robert Marsh of Thames Valley Police arrived within the hour, bringing with him the methodical approach that had earned him a reputation as Oxford's most thorough investigator. He found a room full of writers, editors, and literary agents, people who made their living observing and analyzing human behavior, now awkwardly attempting to process a real-life tragedy in their midst. As paramedics confirmed Daniel's death and prepared to remove the body, Marsh noted Elizabeth Blackwood sitting slightly apart from the others, her elegant features composed as she responded to the sympathetic murmurs of colleagues. "Something isn't right," he confided to Detective Sergeant Nina Paddle. "Watch your eyes. They're evaluating, not grieving." At first glance, Daniel's death presented as an unfortunate natural event, occurring in the midst of a prestigious professional gathering. Yet certain details immediately troubled the experienced detective. The faint almond scent lingering around the teacup, the unusual positioning of Daniel's hands, and most notably, the manuscript page visible in his notebook. a half-finished note that appeared to be addressing some explosive revelation about his wife's novel. The last words Daniel Blackwood had written read, "Elizabeth has known all along. The character isn't fictional. She's made everything public, and now..." The sentence remained unfinished, the final words this influential literary gatekeeper would ever commit to page. DCI Marsh established his command post in the retreat's library, a fitting location, given the literary nature of both victim and suspects. In the publishing world, everyone has a manuscript to sell, and a rejection to avenge, he observed to D.S. Patel, as they prepared to interview the conference attendees. Let's start by understanding exactly who benefited from Daniel Blackwood's considerable influence, and who suffered from it. The initial evidence collection yielded several points of interest. The teacup beside Daniel contained traces of a rare toxin derived from a plant compound that mimicked the symptoms of cardiac arrest, but metabolized rapidly, making detection difficult except through specialized testing. The poison was not common. It required botanical knowledge and careful preparation. More intriguing was the discovery of a small leather-bound notebook concealed beneath the mattress in the Blackwood suite, containing what appeared to be Elizabeth's research notes on various poisons and their effects, disguised as material for a new novel. "I often research unusual deaths for my work," Elizabeth explained when confronted with this evidence, her voice steady, though her fingers twisted the gold band on her left hand. Daniel encouraged thorough research, said it was what separated serious writers from amateurs. "My current manuscript features a botanist who uses plant toxins as weapons. I can provide my editor's correspondence about the project if that would be helpful." The explanation seemed reasonable, especially coming from a crime novelist. Yet Marsh noted the research focused almost exclusively on poisons that were difficult to detect and mimic natural causes, a suspiciously narrow focus. Interviews with conference attendees painted a complex picture of the Blackwoods' relationship. "They were the perfect literary power couple on the surface," explained Marjorie Winters, a veteran editor from Penguin Random House. Daniel built his agency representing commercial fiction, while Elizabeth wrote these thoughtful, critically respected but modest-selling novels. But things shifted dramatically this past year with The Accomplice. Suddenly, Elizabeth was the star, and Daniel seemed unsettled by her success. The most revealing information came from James Harrison, Daniel's assistant at Blackwood Literary. "Mr. Blackwood became obsessed with Elizabeth's novel once it started gaining attention," Harrison explained, visibly uncomfortable. "He initially supported its publication. It was represented by another agent at our firm, not him directly. But once the reviews started comparing it to Patricia Highsmith and Gillian Flynn, he changed. He began researching the legal implications of fiction based on real events. He was particularly concerned about a character named Edward in the novel, a charming university student who orchestrates a complex scheme resulting in the death of a romantic rival. A breakthrough came when forensic examination of Daniel's laptop revealed a hidden folder containing decades of emails between Daniel and various editors, including multiple instances where he had subtly undermined Elizabeth's work while presenting himself as her champion. In one particularly damning exchange from 2012, he wrote to an editor who had expressed interest in Elizabeth's third novel, "Between us, I've read it and feel it needs another year of development. Elizabeth is brilliant but sometimes pushes work out before it's ready. Perhaps suggest a major revision. I'll support your decision, of course." Similar communications spanned nearly 20 years, creating a pattern of deliberate career sabotage disguised as professional guidance. Most disturbing was a recent email exchange with his attorney regarding potential legal vulnerability concerning events at Cambridge University in 1988. The attorney had warned, "If these fictional events are recognizable enough to connect to the actual incident, you may face serious consequences." The fact that no charges were filed at the time doesn't eliminate risk, especially given the current climate regarding historical offenses. My advice remains to address this privately with Elizabeth before the novel gains further attention. When investigators subpoenaed records from Cambridge, they discovered that in 1988, a student named Richard Bennett had died under suspicious circumstances after a rowing club party. The case had been investigated as a possible homicide with Daniel Blackwood, then a third-year student, briefly questioned before being cleared. The official cause was ruled accidental drowning, but witness statements contained troubling inconsistencies that were never fully resolved. "We need to look closely at Elizabeth's novel," Marsh instructed his team. "Compare the fictional Edward to the real Daniel Blackwood at Cambridge." When they did, the parallels became unmistakable, from specific biographical details to the description of a riverside confrontation resulting in a death disguised as an accident. Elizabeth hadn't just written a psychological thriller. She had reconstructed a 30-year-old crime with damning precision. As Marsh prepared to formally interview Elizabeth Blackwood again, forensic analysis of Daniel's phone revealed one final, crucial piece of evidence: a voice memo recorded the night before his death. In it, Daniel's voice was tense. "Urgent. I know what you've done, Elizabeth. Using my past as your plot. I won't allow this to continue. Tomorrow I'm contacting the publisher to halt distribution. This ends now." The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m., less than 12 hours before his death. Daniel and Elizabeth had met at the London Book Fair in 1995. Their introduction, the kind of serendipitous encounter that Elizabeth might have dismissed as too convenient had she read it in a manuscript. She was 25, clutching the draft of her first novel, wide-eyed at the industry gathering. He was 29, already making a name for himself as an agent with an uncanny ability to identify marketable talent. Their conversation at a publishing mixer had stretched into dinner, then drinks, then a passionate discussion of literature that extended until dawn in a quiet corner of a Bloomsbury hotel lobby. "He made me feel seen," Elizabeth later told her closest friend, novelist Catherine Moore, "not just as a potential client, but as a mind with something unique to offer. He spoke about my work with such conviction that I began to believe in it myself." Within 6 months, Daniel had sold her debut novel to a respected independent publisher. A year later, they were married in a small ceremony attended by a who's who of literary London. The early years of their marriage coincided with promising developments in both their careers. Daniel's agency expanded, developing a reputation for discovering distinctive new voices while maintaining a commercially viable list. Elizabeth published her first 2 novels to positive reviews, modest sales, and growing critical recognition. They purchased a Victorian townhouse in Hampstead, hosted legendary dinner parties for writers and editors, and presented the image of intellectual partnership that many in their circle envied. The subtle undermining began so gradually that Elizabeth didn't recognize it for years. Daniel's feedback on her manuscripts became increasingly critical, his suggestions more intrusive. He began to preface his comments with phrases like "readers won't understand this," or "the market has moved away from this kind of introspection." When his second novel was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, but failed to make the shortlist, Daniel suggested she consider more accessible themes for her next book. "I believed he had my best interests at heart," Elizabeth admitted during police interviews. "He was the expert after all. If he said my work needed to be more commercial to succeed, who was I to argue? It took me years to realize he was deliberately steering me away from my strength." The evidence supported her claim. Editors' notes on her early manuscripts showed enthusiasm for exactly the elements Daniel had convinced her to revise or remove. The pattern continued through 3 more novels, each published to decreasing attention as Elizabeth's distinctive voice became diluted by Daniel's guidance. Meanwhile, he built his reputation on discovering and developing bold new talents, particularly women writers whose work explored themes of psychological manipulation and hidden violence, ironically similar to Elizabeth's original vision for her own writing. The turning point came in 2016, when Elizabeth, researching her 6th novel, discovered a box of Daniel's university memorabilia in their attic. Among the photographs and rowing team trophies was a newspaper clipping about Richard Bennett's drowning, with several lines highlighted and annotations in Daniel's handwriting. Most tellingly, she found a torn page from a journal with a partial entry. "No one suspects. Porter actually thanked me for trying to save R. If they only knew I was the one who..." The rest of the page was missing. Disturbed by this discovery, Elizabeth began discreet research into the incident, contacting former classmates of Daniel's under the pretext of researching a novel set at Cambridge. What emerged was a chilling picture. Richard Bennett had been dating Charlotte Porter, a student Daniel had been obsessively pursuing. After the drowning, Daniel had comforted Charlotte, eventually becoming her boyfriend, until she broke things off after confiding to friends that his behavior had become controlling and frightening. Elizabeth's investigation deepened, revealing a pattern of manipulation and possible violence that extended beyond this single incident. Daniel had systematically removed potential rivals throughout his university years, though never again through suspected violence. Instead, he had perfected the art of psychological manipulation, character assassination, and subtle sabotage, tactics Elizabeth now recognized he had employed throughout their marriage to control her career. It was like waking from a 20-year trance, she confided to her journal, in an entry police would later discover. All this time, I believed I wasn't succeeding because my work wasn't good enough. Now I see that my greatest fiction was my belief in our partnership. He never wanted me to succeed, at least not beyond a certain controlled level that wouldn't threaten his sense of superiority. Rather than confronting Daniel immediately, Elizabeth made a calculated decision that would later be described by prosecutors as the perfect literary revenge. She began writing a novel that paralleled the Cambridge drowning and its aftermath, disguising the real events just enough to avoid libel, while ensuring that anyone familiar with the incident would recognize its inspiration. She created a new email account and submitted the manuscript directly to editors, bypassing Daniel entirely. The novel, The Accomplice, was acquired by a major publisher in a significant deal. Elizabeth maintained the pretense that she was still working on another project while secretly developing her breakthrough book. Daniel, busy with his expanding agency, remained unaware until the publication announcement appeared in Publishers Weekly, by which time the manuscript was already being prepared for printing. His reaction was a masterclass in concealed fury. "He congratulated me in front of our friends," Elizabeth told investigators. "But in private, he was incandescent. What have you done?" he kept asking. It wasn't until advance copies went out, and the first reviews mentioned a similarity to a real Cambridge drowning, that he realized I knew everything. That's when the threats began. In the months leading up to the Writers' Retreat conference, Daniel had alternated between attempts to halt the book's distribution and efforts to discredit Elizabeth's mental health among their mutual colleague. When legal avenues proved futile, the publisher's lawyers had vetted the manuscript carefully. He resorted to more direct threats. Elizabeth's personal emails contained messages from Daniel that became increasingly explicit about the consequences she would face if the novel's publicity continued. The final catalyst came when The Accomplice was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, guaranteeing international attention and scrutiny. Daniel, realizing his carefully constructed life was on the verge of collapse, insisted they both attend the Writers' Retreat conference to present a united front while he determined how to contain the damage. Unknown to him, Elizabeth had already decided that this literary gathering would provide the perfect setting for her own carefully plotted conclusion to their story. November 11th, 2018, 2:15 p.m. A weak autumn sun broke through the clouds as Daniel and Elizabeth Blackwood's taxi crunched up the gravel drive of the Writers' Retreat. The Victorian manor house rose before them, its Gothic spires and mullioned windows creating an appropriately dramatic backdrop for the literary conference. The couple presented a united front as they checked in, Daniel in his trademark tailored suit, Elizabeth in a burgundy dress that complemented her silver-streaked dark hair. Only the closest observer might have noticed the tension in her smile or the way he kept his hand firmly at her elbow, fingers pressed a fraction too tight. 4:30 p.m. Elizabeth participated in a panel discussion on truth in fiction. Her responses measured and thoughtful as she discussed the thin line between imagination and reality in creative work. "All fiction contains elements of truth," she told the audience, her gaze briefly meeting Daniel's in the third row. "The writer's skill lies in disguising those truths so artfully that even those who live them might not recognize themselves immediately." Several attendees later recalled the strange intensity with which Daniel watched his wife throughout the session, his knuckles white around the conference program. 7:05 p.m. At the welcome reception in the Manor's great hall, the Blackwoods moved among the literary crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations for Elizabeth's recent success while maintaining appropriate distance from each other. Daniel networked aggressively, shepherding his agency's clients toward influential editors. Elizabeth engaged in quieter conversations, including one with botanist and mystery writer Dr. Helena Forsyth, that several witnesses later flagged as noteworthy. They were discussing plant compounds with medicinal properties, reported Samantha Wright, an editor who had overheard them. Dr. Forsyth mentioned something about certain extracts being undetectable in standard toxicology. I remember because Elizabeth was taking notes quite intensely. I assumed for research purposes. 8:30 p.m. The conference dinner served in the oak-paneled dining room provided the first public indication of friction between the Blackwoods. Daniel had been seated at the high table with the conference organizers, while Elizabeth was placed with other featured authors at a table near the massive stone fireplace. Midway through the meal, Daniel was observed having a heated exchange with the seating coordinator, insisting that the arrangement be modified for subsequent events. 10:17 p.m. Elizabeth excused herself from after-dinner drinks, claiming fatigue from travel and a desire to prepare for her workshop the following morning. Security footage showed her not returning directly to their suite, but instead making a detour to the retreat's herb garden, where she spent approximately 12 minutes before proceeding to the kitchen area. There she engaged the night cook in conversation about special dietary requirements, specifically mentioning Daniel's preference for chamomile tea before bed, a detail the cook found odd since she had already received their preference forms in advance. 11:30 p.m. Daniel returned to their suite after closing down the bar with several prominent editors. According to the voice memo later recovered from his phone, he immediately confronted Elizabeth about her novel. The recording captured their conversation turning increasingly hostile. "You've put everything at risk." Daniel's voice was tightly controlled. "Do you understand what could happen if people start seriously connecting Edward to me? To what happened at Cambridge? You mean Richard Bennett's murder?" Elizabeth's voice was unnervingly calm. "Should I not have called it that in the book? Did accidental drowning sound better to you?" "It was an accident. He was drunk, he fell. After you pushed him. After you decided he was in your way. You have no proof of anything. And now neither of us will have a career once this implodes. That's where you're wrong, Daniel. My career's just beginning. Yours is the one ending." 11:42 p.m. The voice memo ended abruptly. Witnesses in adjoining rooms reported hearing a door slam, followed by silence. Hotel records showed Daniel's key card accessing the retreat's library at 11:50 p.m., where he remained for approximately 40 minutes before returning to their suite. During this time, Elizabeth's movements were unaccounted for, creating what investigators later identified as her window of opportunity to prepare the poison tea. November 12, 2018, 7:05 a.m. Elizabeth was captured on security cameras, leaving their suite dressed in running clothes. She completed a 5-kilometer route through the retreat's extensive grounds, witnessed by 3 other conference attendees who were also taking morning exercise. This established what initially appeared to be a solid alibi for the estimated time of Daniel's death. 7:15 a.m. While Elizabeth was running, room service delivered a pot of tea to the Blackwoods suite in response to an order placed through the retreat's digital concierge system at 6:30 a.m. The order specified 1 pot of English breakfast for 2, seemingly a normal request, though investigators would later determine the digital request had been scheduled the previous evening. The server reported knocking and receiving no answer, using his master key to leave the tray on the writing desk per standard protocol for the retreat. 8:20 a.m. Elizabeth returned from her run, stopping to chat with several authors in the main lobby before proceeding to the dining room for breakfast. Multiple witnesses confirmed her presence from 8:30 until 9:45 a.m., during which time she participated actively in discussions about the day's upcoming sessions. Her demeanor was described as engaged and perhaps more animated than usual, though no one reported anything suspicious about her behavior. 9:45 a.m. Elizabeth excused herself to prepare for her 11:00 a.m. workshop. Security footage showed her returning to their suite, where Daniel's body would have already been growing cold at the writing desk. She remained inside for 17 minutes, long enough, investigators later determined, to ensure Daniel had consumed the poison tea and to arrange specific details of the scene, including positioning his reading glasses and opening his notebook to the page containing his unfinished accusation. 10:15 a.m. Elizabeth appeared at the conference registration desk, inquiring about Daniel's whereabouts and mentioning he wasn't in their room. "He must have left early for his panel preparation," she told the coordinator. "If you see him, please remind him we're meeting for lunch." This interaction established her apparent lack of knowledge about his condition, while creating witnesses who could confirm she hadn't reported finding his body. 10:40 a.m. With Daniel failing to appear for his 11:00 a.m. panel, conference coordinator Sarah Pembroke attempted to call his phone. Receiving no answer, she proceeded to the Blackwood suite at 10:55 a.m., discovering his body and initiating the sequence of events that would bring investigators to the writer's retreat. 11:03 a.m. Elizabeth was informing her workshop participants of a slight delay when Sarah's scream echoed through the manor. Her reaction, moving calmly toward the source of the disturbance while instructing someone to call emergency services, presented the image of composure under pressure. By the time she reached their suite, several people had already gathered. Her performance of controlled shock was convincing enough that initial suspicions focused elsewhere. "I knew something was wrong when he missed breakfast," she told the first police officers on the scene, her voice breaking appropriate. Daniel was absolutely religious about his schedule, especially at professional events. The apparent sincerity of her concern temporarily deflected attention, creating the breathing room she needed before evidence began to accumulate. As Daniel's body was removed from the retreat, Elizabeth stood on the front steps, a colleague's supportive arm around her shoulders. The photographer from the Oxford Mail captured the image that would appear in newspapers the following day. The newly celebrated author watching her husband's body being taken away, her expression a perfect study in dignified grief. It was a scene worthy of fiction, which, as investigators would soon discover, was precisely what it was. The arrest of Elizabeth Blackwood occurred on November 18, just 6 days after Daniel's death, and hours after she had delivered a moving eulogy at his London memorial service. The timing was deliberate, orchestrated by DCI Marsh to maximum effect after forensic evidence confirmed the presence of the rare plant toxin in the teapot, and Elizabeth's fingerprints on its lid. Most damning was the discovery of the same compound in a small vial hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Wuthering Heights in Elizabeth's bedside table at their Hampstead home. Elizabeth offered no resistance when officers approached her outside the memorial reception. "I wondered how long it would take," she reportedly told Marsh as he read her rights. "Daniel would have been disappointed in the police work if I'd gotten away with it." This calm acknowledgement of guilt, combined with her methodical planning, created immediate media fascination with the case now dubbed The Writer's Revenge. The trial became a literary sensation and cultural flashpoint, with daily coverage in national newspapers and heated debates about psychological abuse, career sabotage, and the ethics of Elizabeth's actions. Proceedings revealed the full extent of Daniel's manipulation over their 23-year marriage, including testimony from editors who confirmed he had systematically undermined Elizabeth's work while publicly playing the role of supportive husband. Financial records showed he had diverted income from her earlier books into speculative investments without her knowledge, creating dependency even as he limited her professional growth. Most sensational was the evidence connecting Daniel to Richard Bennett's death at Cambridge. Police reopened the 1988 investigation based on Elizabeth's research and court testimony, interviewing surviving witnesses whose accounts corroborated the sequence of events depicted in The Accomplice. Charlotte Porter, now a university professor in Edinburgh, provided crucial testimony about Daniel's behavior before and after Bennett's drowning, describing his terrifying possessiveness and specific threats he had made regarding his rival. Elizabeth's defense team, led by prominent barrister Victoria Chambers, presented a narrative of decades-long coercive control and psychological abuse. "This is not a simple case of murder for literary fame," Chambers argued in her opening statement. This is the culmination of 23 years of systematic emotional destruction. Mrs. Blackwood discovered not only that her husband had deliberately sabotaged her career, but that he had literally gotten away with murder before they met. When legal channels offered no recourse for either injustice, she made the decision to write her own ending. Psychiatric experts testified about the cumulative psychological effects of long-term manipulation, with Dr. Julian Mercer explaining, Mrs. Blackwood experienced what we term revelation trauma, the profound psychological impact of discovering that a fundamental relationship in one's life has been based on deception, combined with the evidence of a past violent crime concealed by her husband. This created a perfect psychological storm. The prosecution, while acknowledging Daniel's manipulation, emphasized the calculated nature of Elizabeth's revenge. This was not a crime of passion or self-defense, argued Crown Prosecutor Ambrose Phillips. Mrs. Blackwood planned this murder with the same attention to detail that made her novels so compelling. She researched untraceable poisons, created an alibi, and staged the scene to maximize dramatic impact. And she did so not out of fear for her safety, but for revenge and to protect her literary success from his interference. When Elizabeth took the stand, her testimony transfixed the courtroom. Speaking with the same measured eloquence that had made her literary festival appearances so popular, she neither denied her actions nor expressed remorse. Daniel spent decades ensuring my voice would never be fully heard, she told the court. He constructed a narrative where he was the kingmaker, and I was the grateful beneficiary of his expertise. When I finally broke free of that narrative by writing the truth, thinly disguised as fiction, he was prepared to destroy me again rather than face consequences for his past actions. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a verdict of guilty of murder, but with a recommendation for leniency based on the psychological evidence and Daniel's historical actions. The judge, acknowledging the exceptional circumstances, sentenced Elizabeth to 14 years imprisonment rather than the life term typically imposed for premeditated murder. The literary community's reaction was deeply divided. Many prominent authors, particularly women who had experienced similar, if less extreme forms of professional undermining, expressed sympathy for Elizabeth's situation, while stopping short of condoning her actions. Several established writers publicly acknowledged having experienced comparable career sabotage from partners or mentors, sparking industry-wide discussions about power dynamics and publishing relationships. The Accomplice remained in print throughout the trial, its sales boosted by the publicity surrounding the case. The publisher added a new foreword to subsequent editions, acknowledging the real events that had inspired the novel. A portion of the proceeds was directed to a trust for Richard Bennett's surviving family members, who had never accepted the accidental drowning ruling and expressed gratitude that the truth had finally emerged. The case of Elizabeth Blackwood remains a complex moral parable in literary circles, a cautionary tale about the potential consequences when the line between fiction and reality dissolves, and when those who control narratives professionally discover the deadly power of seizing control of one's own story, whatever the cost.